Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Kiana's Show. This afternoon, excuse me, we are not going to waste any time, and we're going to discuss a highly contested international issue, and that is the issue of regime change in Iran. This is a very popular topic that we have heard in echo chambers on the internet. We've heard independent journalists speak about this. We've actually listened to social media influencers, legacy media. This is a very popular topic right now. And indeed, it's popular because there is a war, and the outcome of this war hinges on whether or not there will be a regime change. And I took to ChatGPT. I really haven't consulted it and really don't consult it that often, but I was curious to know some quick arguments for and against regime change. And so an argument for regime change is ending human rights abuses. A second argument for regime change is restoring democracy. So if there was democracy in the past and that has been overthrown by an authoritarian, totalitarian, or a oligarchic government, then regime change would appear to be an important step to take. So another argument for is preventing regional or global instability, economic renewal, and moral responsibility. So there is a belief that powerful nations or international coalitions have an ethical duty to intervene when a regime harms its own people or others, especially when peaceful internal changes seems impossible. And that seems to be partly of what I'm hearing from state agents, right? But there are also arguments against regime change. So there is this unpredictable aftermath. History shows that removing a government can create power vacuums, civil conflict, or long-term instability. The replacement may be worse or simply ineffective. It can also violate a state's sovereignty. It can cause human and economic cost, risk of foreign influence or exploitation. Regime change can be used and has always been thought as a tool of geopolitical advantages, which gives other nations access to resources, strategic positioning, rather than genuine concern for the population. And then there is the issue of lack of local legitimacy. And so we can see that there's a balance being played here where there are arguments in favor of regime change, and then there are arguments that are not in favor of regime change. And of course, going back to the topic at hand, or going back to Donald Trump, he spoke about this recently in his conference or his press conference in Doral, Florida. And this was something that was mentioned, was regime change. But I think we are all overlooking, and this blind spot is really on both sides, and that is what are the needs of the Iranian people? What do they want? So according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, freedom means self-determination, the ability to control and fashion one's own destiny. I think that that's essentially what we all want, right? And so it only makes sense, and it even holds up to scrutiny, that the Iranian people would seek freedom and to fashion their own destiny. And Rousseau's, what he does is he argues that citizens are only free when they participate directly and continuously in shaping the life of their community. And this is what essentially makes us free to some degree. And this takes us also back to positive freedom. Remember, in a couple of videos back, which I'll link in the description box below, I talked about positive freedom. And so an important question here is, do the Iranian people feel they can shape the life of their communities? Are they able to participate directly and continuously in shaping the life of their communities? And I think that this is an important question, not just for Iranian people, but a question for marginalized groups in general, right? Because we know that throughout history there has been a status quo where disenfranchised groups have been unable to participate in shaping, so participating in directly and continuously shaping the life of their own communities. And I'm not surprised that this would connect to the issue of freedom. But again, it raises an important question, right? As it relates to the Iranian people, are they able to, I'm taking us back here, are they able to directly and continuously shape the life of their own communities in Iran? Some would argue, no, that there is little freedom in Iran, right? So for example, Masih Alinejad would argue, no, there is little freedom in Iran. The women are oppressed in Iran, so there is little opportunity for the citizens of Iran to directly and continuously to shape their communities, right? But then when we think about Professor Morandi, he would argue that there is freedom in Iran, and that the morals that are baked into the soil of Iran is what the people want. And thus there is no need for Trump or Israel to seek regime change, because seeking regime change will only make the people more firmer in those beliefs. And that got me thinking, are the beliefs that are there within Iran now, are those beliefs the general will of the people? So Russell, what he does is he argues that by obeying the general will, citizens are therefore doing nothing other than obeying their own true nature. So maybe the general will here in Iran there in Iran would be having the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in power, having the Ayatollah Khomeini in power, and abiding by Sharia law, right? That is an argument. That is the general will of the people in Iran. And by abiding by that general will, which is collectively adhering to Sharia law or collectively adhering to the authority of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, by doing so, that is essentially the true nature of the Iranian people. It follows, therefore, that those who refuse to obey the general will, so denying their own true wills, should be compelled to do so by the community. You may say, wait a minute, what is Rousseau arguing here? Like, what does he mean? Compel? Is that like force? Compelled to do so? Is he speaking of moral communities? And I think on one hand, the answer to that question might be yes, right? And if so, then one could argue there is no real need for regime change because the true will is omnipresent in Iran, right? So there is morality being governed by the government. There is no separation of church and state. It's intertwined. Therefore, there is no need for regime change because that is the general will of the people. And we might be onto something here, right? We might, because Rousseau, what he does is he undergirds that compel means compelling, the communities compelling us is forcing others to be free. But is that freedom is the question. And I think that is what is, I think that that's what has us in such a conundrum, right? Is we haven't really thought this through. And it may even be possible to think it through without the input of the Iranian people collectively. So we have seen the forcing, the tug of war in this, right? Where there is an outside community at play. Not the communities on the inside, but the communities on the outside attempting to force the Iranian people to be free. So we have the Trump administration is heard multiple times talking about a regime change. This is happening multiple times during Trump's speeches. And then we also have protesters, of course, in Belfast. We have protesters in Dublin. We have protesters in the United States. All these protesters are arguing for there not to be any interference with the politics and the sovereignty of Iran. So the protesters are out on the streets and they're telling the Iranian people that this is not the path to freedom. The protest and against war is the path to freedom, essentially. And then the Trump administration is arguing against that. The Trump administration is saying, no, regime change is the path to freedom. Having others come into your country and topple your government is the path to freedom, according to Trump. But neither of those positions sets the Iranian people free, because there are no, I don't think that they're no longer in a position to determine for themselves what is freedom and what is unfreedom. And this doesn't mean that they do not have an epistemological understanding of freedom. I'm quite sure that they do. They know exactly what freedom is, but the question remains, are they in a position to determine it for themselves? And some would argue, well, no, they're not in a position to determine freedom for themselves because they're under this repressive regime, under the Ayatollah. And then others would argue, well, yes, they are in a position to determine freedom for themselves, that agreeing and acquiescing to war in their nation is a lack of understanding as it relates to freedom, right? And when I think about this deeply, I think that this has really negative effects on the Iranian people, because it appears as if they're being bombarded with information that is so inconsistent. But when we think about it, right, so let's digress and go back to Trump's speech, right? Trump is speaking about regime change. But this deep discussion about regime change may be the reason as to why the Trump administration is seeking to bring the Kurds into the fray, right? Because regime change can really only be carried out by someone within the nation, right? So the Geneva Convention, what it does is it protects groups in armed conflicts who are rising up against an oppressive regime, essentially. But right now, I think we all could agree that there is not a national liberation movement in Iran. So yes, the people of Iran has taken to the streets and they have protested. There has been protest against the death of the Ayatollah, and then there has been protest in favor of that. But what we haven't really seen is a national liberation movement. And yes, we have heard that the Trump administration is seeking to arm Kurds in the region and have engaged in activities that would make it possible for them to overthrow the regime. But that, as of this point and at the time of this broadcast, does not appear to be successful. And in order for a person to really be protected under the Geneva Convention, there needs to be a person representing the people of Iran. And so the question is, who is that, right? Who is this person representing the people of Iran? It can't be the Kurds, right? Because this is just a small group that does not share the same ideology of the masses. So that would possibly, I think that would, in effect, be impossible for the Kurds to take over the entire country. So this got me thinking, ladies and gentlemen, and the closest person that fits this description is Masih Alinejad, right? She fits this description. We've seen her on several broadcasting stations speaking out against the regime and how the regime should be, and she has a strong voice in the Americas. But she has made no indication that she wishes to return to Iran to lead her people to liberation. And she can't really do this, right? She can't really do this from inside the United States. Indeed, not all people fighting for their right to self-determination are entitled to claim protection from the regime under international humanitarian law. So in order for a person to claim protection who is attempting to institute and initiate regime change, it appears that that person has to be within the regime or within the soil or on the territory, within the jurisdiction of that nation, a person that is popular, so a person that gains the support of many, many people within their own country. So in order for going back to this protection, in order for a person to gain this protection, in order for this protection to come into force during times of international armed conflict, as it is now, the authority representing the people in their struggle for their right to self-determination must make a declaration. And how do they do that, right? Well, I mean, they have to do that within the nation. I mean, of course, they can do that from outside the nation, but I don't think it will have the same effect as if it is done within the nation. And that person must also have the characteristics of a person that is being led with armed forces, as found in Article 43 of the Protocol. So who is that, right? I mean, that's not Masih Alinejad. I mean, she is, I believe, an asylum seeker, a refugee within the Americas. She doesn't have an armed force. And there is, to reiterate, there is no indication that she seeks to return back to Iran, although she has spoken out and have spoken about wanting her people to be free. I don't think that when I watched many of her interviews that she has actually said that she wishes to go back and to lead her people. And even if she did seek to go back and lead her people, would that leadership, would that be seen as legitimate under the laws of Iran, right? And so the only persons within Iran that has a military or armed force is the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, under the leadership of the Ayatollah, and now the Ayatollah's son. And this could be the reason, ladies and gentlemen, why regime change is so hard, because there has been coups before within other nations, and there has been a group that have come together expressing their right to self-determination, and that has been recognized. And they have been able to topple the government and install a new leader. But the Iranian regime has been in place especially with these thoughts and these beliefs, this theocratic system has been in place as longer than I have been alive. And the culture and the religious beliefs of such a nation can make it very difficult for there to be any change. So Donald Trump may have a difficult time with this one. He really may. Again, going back to international humanitarian law, for there to be legitimacy of regime change under international humanitarian law, in order for a group to be protected, the group has to have the consent and the approval of likely majority of the people within the nation of Iran. And with that, they have to have the armed forces to back them up, to say that the direction that they seek to take the government is okay. And right now, they don't have that. When the Ayatollah was killed, his son stepped into power, although there has been reports that his son is right now injured and harmed. He has stepped into power. And it raises an important question as to whether or not the goals that the Trump administration and Israel, the goals that they seek with this, whether that is going to come to fruition. It remains to be seen, ladies and gentlemen. Tell me what you think. Don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful. Maybe subscribe to this channel if you found this video thought-provoking or interesting, if it got you thinking. Also, you can head over to my Facebook. My Facebook account is @Kiana Canada. I'll link that in the description box below. And I hope that you follow me there. And if you want to have a discussion about this in greater detail, we can. But don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.